Why is there so many people outside today? The weather actually feels a lot colder at times too, where it feels like it could literally freeze, I guess, the water. And what's going on today? This was kind of an interesting read. It sounded like there's a lot more people wanting to use drones for fishing, but the government is basically saying nope, I guess, with various rules and so forth. This one says, government draws a hard line on drone use in South Africa. A recent case has drawn a hard line on drone use in South Africa in one of the most unsuspecting places, fishing. So while they talk about a lot of the common uses nowadays, for example, it says emergency response, journalism, it says South Africans are barred from using drones for fishing and could have their equipment confiscated if caught doing so. Lucine Rudy, Kara Meering, and Claudia Grobler of Cliff Decker Hofmeyr analyzed a case between sellers of bait-carrying remote-controlled drones and the Ministry of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. The applicants were in the business of selling bait-carrying drones, but in February 2022, the Chief Director of Fisheries Operations Support issued a public notice banning the use of certain devices for fishing, including drones. Transgressors would be prosecuted and would have their drones taken away. So with that, obviously not as much people wanted to buy the drones, and then they kind of made an argument saying the applicants said that Marine Living Resources Act included aircraft in the list of devices which could be used for fishing. They argued that the only difference between an aircraft and a drone was that the pilot was not in the vehicle. They added that bait-carrying drones should be seen as a gear according to what is stated in the act. So it's kind of an interesting thought, because I would say anyways, if you're using it recreationally and so forth, it's kind of silly to treat it like a manned aircraft or a huge one, especially if it's a toy, whereas in this case they're kind of saying no, it should be, I guess, so that they could potentially use it for fishing. They really do try to get technical. It says, in addition, the applicants looked at the regulations in terms of the act, which defined angling as recreational fishing that used a rod, reel, or something similar. They said that bait-carrying drones use a manually controlled reel and thus abide by the regulations. However, the respondents questioned whether bait-carrying drones used the correct permits for recreational fishing. They said that bait-carrying drones are not authorized by angling permits, as they only authorize the physical operation of a rod, reel, and line. When it came down to it, it says the court said that the legislator had not left room for any ambivalence in what compromises lawfully permitted fishing. However, the court did not make a ruling based on the interpretation of the legislator, instead highlighting that the matter was just before the Easter weekend, an active time for recreational fishing. The court also said that the economic impact of its decisions would likely be irreversible, whether favorable or unfavorable. The court also held that the definitions of angling still form part of the legislature, as the regulations form part of the act. Thus, the court ruled to dismiss the application due to considerations of judicial difference. The court's ruling means that those using bait-carrying drone for fishing can be prosecuted and have their devices confiscated by the state. So kind of an interesting technicality and arguments in that sense. I think ultimately they should be considered, I guess, different than a traditional aircraft in that sense. It comes down to what you're using and how, ultimately, in my opinion, but it just seems like with the way things are, depending on what you're using it for and how, you tend to try to be technical like that. Although with that thought, more people may have to learn how to fish, because in general, food prices are sky high in a lot of places. So this was kind of interesting, where it talked about how shoplifting is increasing in certain areas and people feel, I guess, okay in doing it. This one says, confessions of a shoplifter. As food costs soar and self-checkouts multiply, more people are stealing and they're not sorry. And for this person here, it says, Tony has been shoplifting most of his food and he feels no guilt. Saying here, quote, I shoplift 80% of my groceries, the Toronto-based 32-year-old said, speaking on condition of anonymity. Since moving to the city from North York 2 years ago, his monthly pay of $2,000 isn't enough to live on amid rising costs, he said, and he's struggling to pay the bills. Shoplifting, theft under $5,000 is a criminal offense in Canada, but that hasn't deterred Tony, who feels that stealing from big supermarket chains to survive should not be a crime. Saying, quote, I don't have any kind of moral quandary of stealing food. If the prices were fair, I'd pay, but I would not be able to survive in my situation without shoplifting. And it talks about how, again, shoplifting has increased, and it seems like a lot more people are doing it through things like self-checkout machines. I know nowadays you usually see a lot of workers there to help out if something's wrong, but I guess that would be a way where a lot of people just don't scan certain items and just go. But it makes you wonder, like in this case too, should you be hunting for your own food, I guess, in these cases when it gets too expensive. It makes me think too in a funny way where when you go to school you'll learn how to interpret things, for example, like the law, to be technical, but at the same time they don't really teach much in terms of you actually going out fishing, for example, or growing your own vegetables. It makes you wonder, should you learn stuff like that in school in order to survive? I think the closest thing I've learned in terms of preparing your own food and stuff like that is like a home economic class. Bake your own cookies, like that type of thing. It makes me wonder, should you be learning more stuff like this too? In case there are times where the food prices are just so expensive, you just have to go out, I guess, and get it yourself versus shoplifting. It's kind of like when I go hiking at times and I just bump into some random people that are very knowledgeable about certain areas and what grows there. I remember one person, for example, he was saying when he goes there in summer, there's like so much blackberries and stuff there and he just eats it. Like that would be a source of food, correct? But at the same time, I remember it was a reality show I watched. I think it was one of those survivor shows where people are on an island. They had no idea there's so much food around them, and I guess one of their rewards was the people that lived there natively. They came out afterwards, they started pulling out all these like food plants and so forth that are edible like that. Again, it makes you wonder if those are the type of stuff we should be learning in schools as well. Alright, see you guys later.